This is Lincoln's Boyhood Memorial, National Memorial. Pretty impressive building. These are the woodworking tools. His father was a carpenter. This is Abraham Lincoln Hall, which is a replica of the typical courthouse during that era. It's a beautiful building as well. Look at the ceiling. Interior walls are sandstone, and the exterior wall is limestone. They had cherry wood. This is the Thomas Lincoln farm in springtime, with lots of flowers blooming. I've never seen this before, a bronze casting of a log cabin. The chimney and the floor joist for four seals, four lower logs. That's what I'm trying to say. And here's a replica of the homestead. Split rails.
Think of the name of that.
Shh. Look at the cedar shakes on that thing. There's a corn crib probably.
Most pioneer families grew their own food and made their own clothes. The little cash money they earned had to be used for things they could not make for themselves. Families were fed by hunting game in the surrounding forests, and more importantly, by clearing their land so crops like corn and wheat could be raised. Cows, chickens, and pigs were also an important part of a family's daily life, as were sheep, whose wool would be spun into yarn, which was then woven into cloth and used to make clothes for the entire family. Using the trees that were cut down while clearing land, pioneers built their own homes and made most of their own furniture. Everyone in the family worked together in the effort to survive and, hopefully, prosper. Such was life on the frontier. Nearby in Kentucky, some pioneers were very unhappy with the state's confusing and complicated land laws. Many settlers had lost farms in property disputes. For them, the state of Indiana, being formed north of the Ohio River, promised a chance at a new beginning. One of these settlers, Thomas Lincoln, decided to take a trip to see Indiana for himself. Finding 160 acres of land that would meet his needs in the Little Pigeon Creek area, he marked the boundaries, laying claim to the land, and returned to Kentucky for his family. The Lincolns put their belongings into a wagon, said goodbye to their friends and neighbors, and started off on the journey to their new home. The first stage of the trek was relatively easy, as they followed a well-traveled road to the Ohio River. There, they crossed the wide river on a ferry. As they got closer to their new home, and further away from the well-settled areas, the condition of the roads deteriorated. Over the last few miles, they had to cut their own road, felling trees and clearing away dense underbrush to create a trail wide enough for the wagon. And in December of 1816, they reached the end of their journey. Thomas' son, Abraham, was 7 years old when they arrived. He would later describe his new home with these words: "When first my father settled here, 'twas then the frontier line. The panther's scream filled the night with fear. and bears preyed on the swine. Abraham Lincoln was big and strong for his 7 years, and his father put an axe in his hands right away. Soon, he was helping his father clear their land, build their cabin, and split rail fences. Thomas Lincoln was a man known for his physical strength, his honesty, and his integrity. Friends and family described him as a man of good morals, with a lively humor and a gift for storytelling. His wife Nancy was an intelligent, gentle, and kind woman, known for her compassion towards others and her affection for her family. Thomas and Nancy encouraged their children to learn. Abraham's formal schooling may have come bit by bit, but he had a tremendous drive to acquire knowledge. Having already learned to read and write, an accomplishment that many adults at the time had not mastered, Abraham would spend his years in Indiana reading anything he could get his hands on, building upon the little bit of formal schooling that was available to him. His sister Sarah was older by 2 years and spent most of the day helping her mother around the cabin, learning all the things she would need to know when she had a family of her own. When the chores were done, including feeding the livestock, they played games together until it was mealtime. Their evenings were spent around the hearth, taking turns reading aloud from the family Bible or listening to stories told by their parents. Working and playing together strengthened the family ties and forged a close, loving relationship within the family. Unfortunately, that bond was soon broken. For in 1818, less than 2 years after moving to Indiana, Nancy Hanks Lincoln died. She had contracted a deadly fever called milk sickness, a fatal illness that came from drinking the milk of a cow that had eaten a toxic plant called white snakeroot. Suddenly, the heart of their small family was gone. With loving hands, Abraham helped his father make a coffin for her, just as they had made others in the preceding weeks as the milk sickness took its toll on the small community. Filled with grief, the Lincolns laid their beloved wife and mother to rest on a nearby knoll.
Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions.
Young Sarah, at only 11 years old, now did the cooking, sewing, mending, and other chores that had been done by her mother. A tough task for a grown woman, let alone a young girl. And there were now 3 children to raise. A cousin of Nancy's, Dennis Hanks, had come to live with the Lincolns as the milk sickness raged through the area. For the next year, the mood in the small house was somber. Life on the frontier was challenging enough, but the loneliness they all felt after Nancy's death only made it more difficult. So in 1819, Thomas headed back to Kentucky to look for another wife and a mother for his children. Thomas had heard that a longtime friend, Sarah Bush Johnston, or Sally as she was commonly called, had lost her husband a couple of years earlier. She was now trying to raise 3 children on her own and having a tough time of it. Finding her, much as he remembered, kind, competent, and a good mother, he proposed marriage. Sally accepted, and soon she and her children, Elizabeth, Matilda, and John, found themselves on the road to southern Indiana. The new Mrs. Lincoln set about uniting the 2 families. She continued to foster the quest for knowledge in young Abraham that was begun by Nancy. Sarah gave him the 3 books she had brought with her, a treasure trove at that time, when owning even 1 book was a rarity. As the years passed, and Abraham entered his teenage years, another book came into his possession, one that would have a profound influence on him. The Life of George Washington by Mason Weems was one of the first books written about an American by an American. Abraham avidly read page after page. He found himself identifying with the young Washington, especially since George had been big and strong for his age, much as Abraham himself was. Young Lincoln was very impressed by Washington's life and by the sacrifices made both by him and by other Americans so that the dream of liberty and democracy could become a reality. At about this same time, Abraham also acquired a biography of Benjamin Franklin. The young Lincoln found much in common with Franklin as well. They both had a tremendous love for books and a gift for public speaking. It was from this book that Abraham began to understand the underlying reasons for the American Revolution. As Abraham reached the age of 16, he was becoming well known in the area as a smart, hard-working lad with a good sense of humor and a gift for public speaking, especially when telling stories at Gentry's store. It was also time for him to find gainful employment. His skill with the axe meant he could make money by chopping firewood for the river steamers that traveled on the Ohio River. While helping to load the firewood on board the boats, Abraham had a chance to talk with the captains and their crew, giving him a broader view of the world outside Indiana and Kentucky. Working near the ferry dock on the river also led to young Lincoln's first encounter with the legal system. One day, he was approached by a couple of gentlemen who asked him to ferry them out to catch a passing steamboat. Abraham had built a small rowboat and was happy to load the passengers in and row them to the middle of the river. Later in his life, he would recall this incident, finishing his account of it with the words, "I could scarcely credit that I, a poor boy, had earned $1 in less than a day." Taking passengers out to catch passing boats soon became a regular source of income for him. However, the local ferry service company had other ideas. They took Abraham into court, claiming he was infringing on their rights to carry people across the river. Abraham's argument was that he was not taking them across the river, only to the middle of it. The judge sided with Abraham, and he won his first court case, an event that may have influenced his decision to choose the law as a career.
Court dismissed.
The years passed quietly for the Lincolns in southern Indiana, but that all changed in 1828, a pivotal year in the young life of Abraham Lincoln. Grief once again gripped Abraham as his beloved sister and lifelong friend Sarah died, giving birth to her first child. The unknown complications also claimed the infant's life. Mother and child were buried together in the small cemetery next to the Little Pigeon Church. Saddened by yet another loss of a beloved family member, Abraham welcomed the opportunity to accompany his friend, Allen Gentry, on a flatboat trip down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers to New Orleans.
Really strong. He would be a real good addition to your farm or your house. Do I hear 60? 60?
It was on this trip that Abraham first came face to face with the realities of slavery. From a young age, he'd been exposed to the anti-slavery sentiments of his father and mother, and now he saw the actuality of it for himself in the form of a New Orleans slave auction. Allen Gentry later reported that Abraham watched with anger as families were separated and sold. It was undoubtedly a disturbing sight for a compassionate young man to witness. In 1830, as Abraham turned 21, he and his family left Indiana for the richer soil of Illinois and to escape another outbreak of milk sickness. But it was in Indiana that much of Abraham's personality and many of his ideals were formed. He arrived a young boy and left a young man. As he later said, "There